Within American automotive history, there have certainly been a number of ugly interiors that the automakers put out over time. And within these ugly interiors were the woods of fake plastic trees, many of whom sacrificed their life to be on the dashboards of cars across the 1950s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s, and in some cases even through to today. But there are a few instances of interiors with fake wood that stand out, some that were pretty deplorable and some that certainly were quite realistic, in fact. On the realistic side, one might point to the 1969 Lincoln Mark III, which had very convincing fake wood. In fact, by 1970, the Mark III would go to real wood on the dashboard. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, which is what we'll focus on for this particular episode, is the 1974 Cadillac interior. And yes, 1 year only we're going to focus on here for Cadillac in a number of years that employed faux woodgrain. But 1974 really stands out among all of them. And here's why. As the 1973 model year turned into 1974 for Cadillac, the exteriors of all Cadillac vehicles changed pretty dramatically. This was really due to the introduction of federal motor vehicle safety standards, which mandated 5-mile-an-hour impact standards in the front and rear of the vehicles. In 1973, the 5-mile-an-hour impact standard was confined to just the front of the vehicle. And prior to 1973, the impact standards were minimal or, in some cases, nothing for the bumpers, hence their decorative appearance rather than functional appearance. But in 1974, Cadillacs got chunky bumpers on the outside, and the styling suffered a bit as a result. But on the inside is really where the story lies. In 1973, it was the last year that in full-size Cadillacs, they had the dashboard that was introduced in the 1971 model year, a sort of semi-wraparound, driver-centric cockpit that Cadillac employed, but all the other GM divisions in their full-size vehicles also had similar variations on this theme, except for Chevrolet, which did not have that similar driver-oriented U-shaped cockpit in front of the driver. However, for the 1974 model year, Cadillac decided to go with a new IP theme or instrument panel theme and took the warning lights out of the center area of the instrument panel and put them on a separate row horizontally over top of the speedometer cluster and where the air vents were. This was done for safety as well as a bit of gimmickry, but in reality it did function quite well. This was a rather tasteful element, shall we say, of the 1974 Cadillac interior styling theme, and it would continue on the full-size Cadillacs through the 1976 model year and on the Eldorado through the 1978 model year. However, a few touches of this revised 1974 interior were really, really awful. First was the revision to the silver backface speedometer, which would last for just 1 year only and proved challenging for some drivers to read in direct sunlight. Aside from the legibility concerns, it really doesn't look all that good. However, the most egregious change in the 1974 model year must be to what can only describe as one of the worst faux wood grains ever put in an automotive vehicle, foreign, domestic, across the course of history. In 1974, Cadillac employed this kind of yellowy-looking faux wood grain that adorned the instrument panel in a horizontal theme as well as the steering wheel, and it looks in person as yellowy, if not more yellow, than in these photos. In other words, the interior became afflicted with some form of jaundice that it's hard to reconcile with the overall luxury theme that Cadillac was undoubtedly going for in the 1974 model year. And aside from the yellowish color of the fake wood that adorned the dash in 1974 Cadillacs, there's also some strange features and quirks. One is this metal trim piece that's in the middle of the faux wood grain trim on the passenger side of the dash. That would only be there in 1974 before changing in 1975. Of course, the wood grain would also change in 1975. And there were also some strange new controls, most notably the wiper control that was at the top left of the instrument panel, which replaced a wiper control that was integrated into the door on the 71 to 73 models. This joystick control on the 74 all the way through the 78 Eldorados and the 74 to 76 full-size Cadillacs was very flimsy feeling and challenging to operate over rough terrain. The worst part of it being if you had the optional delay feature, the delay feature was activated by moving the joystick to the right, and then as you encountered a rainstorm of increasing intensity to the point where you had to switch off from the delay wipers and on to continuous wiping, you had to move the joystick back left through the off position and then up into the low position, medium, or high position. If you executed the change with the joystick control while the wipers were on their descending path down toward the cowl, you risked that they entered the park position momentarily before restarting again and entering the continuous wipe phase. Certainly not something that you'd want to do if you encountered a sudden cloud burst, for example. Other non-ideal features, shall we say, of this interior included the instrument panel vents, which at first blush don't appear to be anything special, and that's kind of exactly the whole point. They were plasticky and very cheap feeling, and for whatever reason, they also had a hard time not rotating out of the position to which one would set them in, often up or down. Just wasn't enough friction to hold them in place with where a driver or passenger wanted them, and consequently, the airflow would come out in a different location from what was desired by the driver or the passenger. And last but not least, another key issue with these instrument panels and interiors was just that they didn't feel all that rich in the Cadillacs of this era. Yes, there were some special edition trims like the Fleetwood Talisman where the interior was a bit more upscale. But by and large, if you just got a Cadillac Calais or a DeVille or even an Eldorado, the instrument panel, as an example, was mostly hard touch materials. The door panels were soft touch, but vacuum formed and really not anything special. The seat fabrics and leathers didn't feel all that rich either. And the carpet was, more deep pile than in the other General Motors divisions, but not as great as it would become later, in particular, as the 70s went on, or as rich as it was in other competitive vehicles like the Lincolns and Fords of the era. But in terms of all the elements on these vehicles and their interiors, I think the one thing that particularly stands out in this 1974 Cadillac interior is that awful, awful faux wood grain. Hope you enjoyed this discussion of the 1974 Cadillac interiors. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you. Thanks again for watching.